In every war, there are two fronts. One is drawn on maps, marked by trenches, artillery positions, railway lines, and arrows showing advances and retreats. The other is drawn in houses, schools, backyards, fields, and streets. Places that never appear in official reports, but where life continues, altered yet persistent. During the First World War, millions of children lived on that second front. They did not wear uniforms or carry rifles. They did not receive medals or appear in military communiques. Yet they marched through the war in their own way, with satchels instead of packs, games improvised in bomb shelters, chores expanded to fill gaps left by absent adults, and imaginations that worked tirelessly to make sense of events too large for any age. This is the story of those children, not as victims alone, but as surprising carriers of resilience and quiet courage. For most children, the war did not begin with declarations or speeches. It began in small signs. A father's suitcase taken down from the wardrobe and packed with more care than usual. A mother's sewing table suddenly covered with fabric in somber colors. School lessons interrupted by an adult with a serious face. The familiar train station crowded with men in unfamiliar hats. At first, the changes seemed temporary, like a storm that would soon pass. Adults spoke of a short conflict, of being home by a certain holiday, of everything returning to normal soon. Children listened and accepted this, because children are experts at trusting the tone of a voice even when they do not understand the content of the words. Weeks became months. In towns and villages, children noticed that the line of fathers and elder brothers leaving did not quickly reverse. Their names appeared on lists posted at town halls, or in letters opened with careful fingers. The uniforms that had been worn with pride in the first days now appeared only in yellowing photographs placed on mantelpieces. Yet life did not stop. It adjusted. School became one of the most visible places where childhood and war overlapped. In some regions, classes grew smaller as boys approached the age of enlistment and left. In others, classrooms became more crowded as refugees arrived from evacuated areas, bringing new accents and stories. Teachers who had once focused on arithmetic and grammar now balanced those lessons with drills, charity drives, or simple efforts to keep fear from overtaking their pupils. Textbooks remained the same, but what the children saw as they walked to school changed. Plowed fields now bristled with training camps. Parks took on military tents. Streets filled with ambulances or wagons carrying supplies. Children learned to count not only numbers on a page, but uniforms in a column, airplanes in the sky, flags in a parade. In some towns within reach of enemy aircraft, school days included sudden journeys to basements or cellars. What might have been a terrifying disruption became, surprisingly often, a kind of solemn adventure in children's minds. They noticed details adults overlooked: the pattern of dust on bricks, the sound of breathing in the dark, the way candlelight trembled but did not go out. Older students helped younger ones downstairs, sharing blankets and whispered reassurances. Teachers, even when afraid themselves, used those moments to practice calm. They continued lessons afterward, as if the interruption had been a mere summer storm. To the children, this stubborn continuity sent an unspoken message. Learning still mattered, even when the world outside shook. In rural areas, school hours were sometimes shortened, so children could help with farm work left undone by absent fathers and brothers. Children moved from chalkboards to fields more often, becoming both students and laborers. Yet they carried their books with them, reading during short breaks, reciting lessons while walking behind plows or carrying baskets. Thus, school did not vanish during the war. It relocated into every corner of their days. When adults left for the front, a space opened in the daily machinery of life. Children stepped into it, not always by choice, but often with a surprising sense of pride. In cities, boys and girls ran errands for neighbors, collected coal or wood, stood in lines for bread or milk, and learned how to navigate ration cards. A child who had once been too shy to speak to shopkeepers now negotiated prices, counted coins with care, and remembered lists of items by heart. The simple act of returning home with a loaf of bread intact could feel like a small victory. In the countryside, children learned to milk cows, feed animals, and repair fences. They guided plows behind horses or oxen, planted seeds, harvested crops, and helped clean tools at day's end. They discovered the satisfaction of seeing a field they had helped tend grow green and full, the way careful effort could coax abundance from the earth despite the war's demands. Many children experienced, for the first time, the feeling of being necessary. Their labor was not decorative or symbolic. It mattered. Their families and communities depended on it. Although the work was tiring and sometimes overwhelming, it also strengthened their sense of self. They were no longer simply children in the old sense. They were partners in survival. Even under the shadow of war, children played. The instinct for play proved as stubborn as grass growing between cobblestones. In villages near the front, games adapted to new landscapes. Trenches in fields, if not under immediate danger, became forts in the imaginations of younger children. Piles of sand from construction or repair projects turned into mountains to be conquered. Sticks became swords or flags. Stones became imaginary grenades, though their explosions were made of laughter, not shrapnel. In safer regions, city children played among posters and sandbags. They traced chalk lines on pavement between stacks of supplies or in courtyards where military wagons sometimes parked. They collected discarded items, empty cartridge cases, bits of wire, fabric offcuts, and turned them into toys or props for elaborate dramas invented on the spot. Many of their games mirrored the war, but always with crucial differences. In children's versions, the wounded recovered quickly, the missing returned in time for supper, and battles ended decisively before bedtime. Victory was common, loss was brief and reversible. Through play, children rehearsed possibilities that reality often denied them. It was a quiet form of emotional self-defense. Some adults worried when they saw children pretending to be soldiers or officers, but others understood that play was how the young mind tried to take hold of something vast and confusing. By shrinking the war into a backyard theater where sticks and shouts carried the day, children asserted a small measure of control in an uncontrollable world. Yet, not all games revolved around conflict. Many children consciously sought the opposite, pretend shops, imaginary farms. Households created from scraps where dolls were fed, clothed, and put to sleep, as if nothing outside the yard had changed. These games preserved another kind of hope, the hope that life would one day be simple again. For children whose fathers, brothers, or uncles were at the front, the postal service became a bridge of enormous importance. They learned to recognize certain envelopes, handwriting, and stamps with a speed that put adults to shame. They hovered near letterboxes at delivery times, ears trained to catch the brief sound of mail dropping through. On days when a letter arrived, everything else in the household paused. On days when it did not, life went on with a slightly heavier step. Many children wrote letters themselves. Their handwriting improved quickly under the pressure of wanting to be understood. They described school, weather, pets, and neighbors with earnest detail, knowing that such small pictures of home might be treasured at the front. They tucked in drawings of houses, animals, or imagined battlefields where everyone survived. Some sent parcels as well, helping their mothers wrap socks, scarves, or sweets in brown paper. A single chocolate bar might be divided into pieces, so multiple packages could contain a bit of pleasure. Children pressed flowers between pages and slipped them inside parcels, imagining their scent arriving intact across miles of mud and barbed wire. In return, they sometimes received souvenirs: a foreign coin, a small carved figure, a pressed wildflower from another country's field, or a simple sketch of a trench or dugout. These objects became treasures, proof that the absent were still connected to the present. Letters and parcels taught children a vital lesson: that words and small, carefully chosen gifts could cross distances no one could walk. That care could travel. The war awakened in many children a fascination with maps. In schools and homes, adults unrolled them to follow battles reported in newspapers. Children peered over shoulders or traced lines with small fingers. Names they had never heard became familiar: towns on the Western Front, rivers in Eastern Europe, ports and straits far away. Geography stopped being an abstract subject. It became the stage upon which the drama of their own lives unfolded. Some children began their own collections of maps cut from newspapers or magazines. They pinned them on walls, drew arrows, circled places where relatives were stationed. They learned to follow front lines as they shifted, to understand the importance of railways and rivers, to see how far food or supplies had to travel just to reach their own tables. Maps offered a sense of perspective. They showed that the war, while huge, was also limited by borders and coastlines. The world was larger than the conflict. Beyond the shaded regions of fighting lay oceans, distant continents, cities that continued their daily routines largely untroubled. For children, this realization provided a quiet reassurance that even if their own corner of the world was darkened, light still existed elsewhere. In some cases, maps did more than inform. They inspired. Younger brothers and sisters of soldiers imagined journeys they might take after the war, to the cities whose names they had learned, to the rivers whose shapes they had memorized. The war, paradoxically, expanded their imaginative horizons even as it constrained their physical ones. Charity became another way children participated in the war effort often with surprising enthusiasm. They collected scrap metal, paper, and sometimes bones for reuse in industry. They organized small fundraising events, fairs, concerts, craft sales, with adult assistance. They knitted simple squares to be joined into blankets, rolled bandages under supervision, or helped assemble care packages for wounded soldiers. These activities offered children a channel for their concern. Instead of simply hearing about suffering, they could do something, even if only in miniature. The quantity of material they gathered or the funds they raised might be small on a national scale, but the effect on their sense of usefulness was enormous. Children visited local hospitals or convalescent homes where permitted, bringing flowers, homemade cards, or small performances of songs and recitations. The sight of a child entering a ward created a brief but profound shift in atmosphere. Conversation softened, laughter became more frequent, and for a few minutes, the war seemed to step back, allowing simpler joys to occupy the room. These visits also taught children compassion in a concrete way. They shook the hands of men with bandaged stumps, spoke to those with scars, and realized that courage and vulnerability could live in the same person. They learned to look beyond uniforms to the human beings wearing them. In many of these interactions, something passed between wounded adults and healthy children that neither fully understood at the time. A mutual recognition of fragility and of the need to protect what remained unbroken. For children in cities affected by air raids or blackout regulations, night lost some of its familiar comfort. Street lamps dimmed or went out. Windows were covered. The reassuring glow of town life softened to a whisper. Yet even this darkness contained moments of wonder. On clear nights, with fewer artificial lights, the stars stood out more sharply than many had ever seen. Children pressing their faces to small uncovered corners of window could trace constellations with unusual clarity. The sky became a deep map of its own, stable and vast above the flickering uncertainty of the world below. Parents and teachers sometimes used these opportunities to point out planets, the Milky Way, or specific stars said to guide sailors or travelers. Such knowledge grew suddenly comforting. The positions of stars did not change with battles. They were indifferent to borders. Children learned that above the war existed a steady, luminous calm. In the countryside, away from cities, children who helped with evening tasks often paused to look up from wells, fields, or barns. They recognized familiar star patterns and began to associate them with the rhythm of seasons and work. The war might dictate planting schedules in new ways, but the earth and sky continued their ancient collaboration. This awareness that certain things continued unaffected became a quiet anchor for young minds pulled in many directions by rumor, worry, and abrupt change. War mixed populations. Refugees fled from one region to another. Children were evacuated from cities to safer rural areas. Relatives took in nieces, nephews, or grandchildren whose parents were absent. As a result, many children grew up in households unlike their original ones. In such homes, new relationships formed. City children learned to help with farm work and discovered the texture of soil and the scent of hay. Country children temporarily living with urban relatives discovered markets, trams, and the dense patchwork of city neighborhoods. Children of different dialects, habits, or religious traditions shared rooms, meals, and secrets. Shared hardship often quickened friendship. A child far from home found comfort in another's willingness to share a favorite game or a corner of a blanket during a cold night. They swapped stories about their schools, families, and towns, some now inaccessible because of the war. This exchange expanded their understanding of their own country, and sometimes beyond it. In convalescent homes or hospital-adjacent lodgings, children of nurses, doctors, and staff mingled with local youngsters. They became accustomed to the sight of uniforms and stretchers, yet still managed to find hiding places suitable for games of chase or pretend. Their normality adapted rather than disappeared. These new bonds sometimes outlasted the war itself. Long after armies demobilized, letters continued between foster families and former evacuees, between children who had shared those exceptional years. In this way, the upheaval of war quietly strengthened the fabric of society in unexpected patterns. There is no denying that the First World War forced many children to grow up faster than they otherwise might have. Responsibility knocked early. Awareness of death arrived sooner. Economic realities introduced themselves with blunt clarity. Yet growing up does not mean losing all trace of childhood. It often means adding layers to it. A boy who had taken over his father's tasks on a farm might still carve small boats from wood scraps and race them in streams after rain. A girl who queued each morning for bread might still hum tunes and braid ribbons into her hair. A child who had memorized the names of battles might still feel a thrill of delight at the first snowfall of winter or the first cherries of summer. This mixture, the simultaneous presence of heavy knowledge and lightheartedness, is one of the most remarkable things about children living through war. They did not forget their responsibilities, but neither did they abandon their capacity for joy. The ability to find happiness in small things became not a sign of ignorance but of strength. In diaries written years later, adults who had been children during the war often recalled both the hardship and the strange beauty of certain memories, the taste of scarce sweets, the warmth of sharing a bed with siblings during cold nights, the glow of candles in a darkened house, the kindness of a neighbor who mended their only pair of shoes. The war etched itself into their identities, but it did not fully define them. They carried forward both scars and skills, resilience, adaptability, the habit of looking out for others, and a sharpened sense of what truly mattered. When the armistice came in November 1918, children experienced it in ways every bit as vivid as adults, though filtered through their own priorities and perspectives. In some places, church bells rang for the first time in months or years, their sound unfamiliar but instantly beloved. Children ran to windows or out into streets to see what the commotion meant. Flags appeared from trunks or closets. The heavy mood that had hung over towns and villages for so long lifted abruptly, like a curtain pulled back from a dim stage. Some children had never known a world without war. For them, the sudden shift was almost bewildering. They noticed adults laughing louder than usual, crying openly without shame, embracing people they normally greeted with restraint. Schools announced holidays or gatherings. Streets, once carefully subdued under blackout rules, filled with music, singing, and impromptu parades. In the countryside, children accompanying adults to fields or markets heard the news from passing travelers or from church announcements. The sky looked the same, but everything beneath it felt different. The idea of a future not measured in campaigns or ration periods began to form, slowly but powerfully. Yet even in those moments of celebration, children noticed absences. The father who did not return. The older brother whose place at the table remained empty. The neighbor whose house was still shuttered. They understood, in their own way, that peace did not restore everything. But they also felt something else. Possibility. The tasks that had weighed heavily on small shoulders could be shared again. The worry that had lived in every adult's eyes softened. Streets might belong once more to games, not only to marching feet and supply wagons. The maps on walls could be studied for journeys, not battles. The world, damaged and weary, seemed to open slightly. Children stepped through that opening into a future they would help shape. The children who lived through the First World War carried its imprint all their lives, but they also carried gifts forged in difficult circumstances. They knew how to work hard and improvise. They understood the importance of cooperation. They had seen adults at their best and worst, and learned from both. They recognized the fragility of normality, and thus valued it deeply. Many of them, as adults, dedicated themselves to preventing a repetition of such catastrophe. Some chose careers in teaching, social work, medicine, or politics, shaped by early experiences of scarcity and generosity. Others simply raised their own children with a determination to provide stability, kindness, and a sense of safety whenever possible. Not all succeeded, and history did not always cooperate. But the effort itself mattered, and it emerged directly from the lessons of their childhoods. In countless homes, small rituals preserved the memory of resilience born in those years. Families kept ration books, letters, or toys carefully mended during the war. Stories were told of how grandparents or parents had coped as children, the chores they took on, the games they invented, the moments of light they found in dark times. These stories became part of family identity, a reminder that even under extreme pressure, humanity can remain gentle as well as strong. The children of the Quiet Front were not generals or statesmen. They did not sign treaties or lead armies. Yet, they played a crucial role in holding together the thin threads of everyday life. They kept houses warm, fields tended, shops open, and schools functioning. They carried hope in ways that statistics and official histories rarely record. The story of the First World War is often told in large terms: nations, empires, strategies, losses measured in millions. But beneath those numbers lies another narrative, quieter yet no less important. The story of children who grew up at the edge of chaos and chose again and again to help, to learn, to play, and to care. Their courage was rarely dramatic. It showed itself in small acts, carrying a pail of water without spilling a drop because a tired mother needed rest, sharing half a loaf with a neighbor's family when rations grew thin, teaching a younger sibling to read by candlelight in a crowded room, holding a lantern steady on a path so an injured stranger could be guided safely. Such acts rarely appear in history books. Yet, they are the threads from which societies are woven and rewoven, especially in times of crisis. In remembering the First World War, it is worth remembering not only the thunder of guns and the weight of decisions, but also the soft steps of children walking to school under strange skies, the laughter that persisted in courtyards darkened by blackout curtains, the small hands that learned to do big tasks, and the hearts that remained open even when the world closed in. Because in every war, it is often the quiet front that determines what kind of world will exist when the noise finally stops. And in that quiet front, children are never merely bystanders. They are, in their own way, builders of the future.